Hey guys, welcome back to Home Theater Gurus. So you've got a house, you've got a lot of rooms, and you want a home theater. You're not sure which room to use. Maybe it's an open concept like a living room. You're not sure if it can work as a home theater or a multi-use room. Maybe you've got a few bedrooms and you're not sure which one is going to work to fit your needs. Or maybe you've gone online and seen the sea of really bad information out there. Finding good information is like a needle in a haystack. And you were told that your room is too small for a home theater, which is hogwash. Maybe you've been told you need 9-foot ceilings for Atmos, which, I mean, sure, the taller the ceiling, it's great, but I mean, that's also nonsense. You can have exceptional Atmos with a low ceiling. You just have to choose the right speakers and they have to be set up properly. The point is, it's about design. You can have an amazing system with the most expensive speakers, but you can easily be out-designed. And no, you cannot fix that with processing. Fancy processors cannot fix like placement issues or and not perfectly dialed in, totally, and things like that. All right, so let's get back to how to kind of tell what room we should use for a home theater. All right, so one of the first things people look at is how many seats do you want? What kind of seats are you gonna have in the room? Are you gonna have home theater seats? So let's say you are. So you're gonna have something like the Valencia Tuscany, which is kind of a standard size home theater seat. So if you want, like, say, a row of 3, I like to have, well, keep this in mind, you need aisles on both sides, or usually, if it's really small and people need to cram as many seats wide as they can, sometimes they'll shift it over to the side wall and just have one aisle. The only problem with that is that seat's so close to the wall, it's not gonna sound that good. But if you, which you can do that. Sometimes we have to make compromises, but I like to have between 30 and 36 inches of aisle space. I mean, you can get down to 24 inches if you have to, but I mean, by the time you add acoustic treatments, now if you're not using in-walls for surrounds, which I love in-walls for surrounds because they don't take up a lot of room, and for performance, we're gonna go over that in some later series, but yes, for performance, no SBIR, you get more output down low, they perform extremely well, and we don't want to tow them in. That's something we'll go over. We've gone over on the channel already, but we're going to go over that again later in some future videos. Now, about these future videos, I am doing a course. YouTube has courses, so I'm going to start putting these in courses where you can purchase whichever ones you want. And of course, I can design your whole room for you, very reasonably priced. I sell the gear. If you buy from me, you're gonna more than pay for your plan price. So that's gonna be in a later course. Like I said, you can dig and hunt through the channel. We have gone over it before. So let's say you want an aisle on both sides. You've got 3 rows of standard theater seats. So for that, I recommend around 14.5 to 15 feet just for some really nice wide aisles. You can go down to 14. So let's say 14 to 15. If you get below that, it's gonna start to feel cramped unless you get, like some slims. So some of the slimmer seats that, the butts aren't quite as big, and they've also got thinner armrests, which those are fine too, but just as for standard seats. But if you wanna do that, just remember you want around 30 to 36 inches of aisle on both sides. Now, if you wanna go with 4, you're 4 seats wide, I would go 16 to 17, and with the ideal being more the 16.5 to 17 feet of room width. Of course, some of you guys like sofas. So if you like sofas, I mean, you just kind of look at how big the sofas are you want to put in there and add your aisle width. Personally, I don't like sofas at home theaters because when I'm in my theater, I want to just kick back and relax and just kind of drift away into the movie I'm watching, and having to hold this melon up. For me, it's extremely uncomfortable. I've tried it, low back chairs, and just freaking hate it. So it does block the rear some, but it should not block the surrounds if your surrounds are properly located. But there's things we can do to mitigate that as well. But comfort for me is priority 1, because if I'm not comfortable, I'm not even gonna use the room. So what good is a home theater that I won't even use? Now let's go over room length. Now, if I'm designing the room, a lot of times, I'll ask my clients, do you want a bass trap wall in the front where that eats up another 18 inches or so of space? We have subs we can hide in there. We can hide the LCR, everything behind the screen. It looks like a extremely expensive screen wall, really clean, high-end look. It's not that expensive, especially if you can DIY, if you're handy. So if you do want something like that, just remember you're gonna have to add about 18 to 20 inches on top of the measurements that we're fixing to discuss. All right, so the last thing you wanna do is sit too far from the screen. Now, when we look at where we're gonna sit in a room, we need to look at the room modes, because that is where we have like dips in our bass response. We don't wanna sit right in one. So we need to pay attention to a room mode calculator. I've gone over that in the channel. But now keep in mind, if you're doing a bass trap wall, you're going to do a lot of damage to the majority of the low frequencies. You're not going to have to worry about some of the upper ones, especially if they're in, you know, above the subs. They're going to be completely handled. You can also look at, I think it's episode 10 where we went over room modes, if you want to go ahead and check that out now. But even if you just kind of guess, you're going to be within a foot. You know, if you want to sit at a spot X and then later you do, you know, your modal analysis and you're going to have to move, it's not going to be that far. So don't worry too much about it, just trying to figure out the general room size. So how far do we want to be? We don't want to sit too far because the screen's going to be too large to light up. So if you're sitting 15 feet away, in my opinion, that's a no-go. Because if you're 15 feet away, even to get a 45-degree viewing angle on a 16:9 screen, you know, that screen's 165 inches or something like that. This is exactly what it would be. Your mains have got to flank a 16:9. If the 16:9 is properly, you know, sized, if it's anywhere between 45 and 48 degrees, which is kind of where I like to be on the viewing angle. So that's going to be very hard to light up, especially with HDR. Plus it's a 16:9. And to have if you're at 45 degrees from a 16:9, you know, that's that large, you've got to have room beside it, flanking that screen for your mains, because you don't want your mains to be, you know, 18 degrees from zero, you know, 38, 40 degrees apart, because you're not going to have much of a sound stage. You're not going to have much movement as objects pan from the right, you know, main or the left main across, you know, to the center to the other main. It's going to be cramped. And as you know, like if you take two speakers and you put them closer and closer together, as objects pan between them, you lose that sense of width. We don't want to lose that. So I'm going to tell you right now, refrain from trying to go sitting too far away. I like to sit anywhere between 10 to 12, 13 feet away or somewhere around there, because that gets you anywhere, you know, from 120 to 150 inch screen, something manageable. But make sure that if you're doing 16:9, you realize your mains have got to have room beside the screen. Now, if you go in scope, the mains are going to be behind the screen, because then we're going to have closer to a 58 to 60 degree viewing angle. So that is something to really pay attention to, is don't sit so far back that you can't properly size your screen or your mains. Your mains have got to be, you need a nice wide sound stage, but we also need width on our screen. Our screen needs to be immersive, but it needs to be comfortable. So if your room's 12 feet wide, I mean, you can't sit 12 feet back. You can't. There's no room. You know, you're not if you want it to perform well. So you may have to scoot up to say 10 feet. You know, now we're talking about 120 inch or so 16:9, which is going to feel, it's going to be very large from 10 feet. It's going to be larger than 150 would feel from 15 feet. You know, because it's a larger viewing angle, but we can get our mains properly placed. So that's going to kind of help dictate where you need to sit from the screen to have an immersive experience. And we want to make sure our mains are properly placed. Now, of course, our rears behind us, you know, if we can have another 6 feet, that's great. At least 4 feet is really what you need to strive for. But if you can have more, that's even better, to get a little more distance from our rears. Now, adding rows. If you're adding conventional theater seats, we add roughly 6 feet per row. All right, so then there's height. You know, you're kind of stuck with what you have. If you've got a 7-foot ceiling, it's okay. Don't worry about it. If you can properly place and aim your Atmos speakers, that is extremely key. You have to remember angles. So you may only have 2 seats that are on the proper side of Atmos of the speakers, but look at, you know, commercial theaters. You know, 3/4 or half of the seats are outside of the Atmos speakers anyway. Don't push your speakers to the side. That's one of the goofiest things we see, where people ignore angles and just push the speakers to the sidewalls. No separation between the bed layer and the Atmos, and now no seats sound good. So we want to get the most performance we can. You're going to have to make some compromises sometimes. You just keep trucking. You know, it is what it is. As long as you understand the compromises, don't destroy the sound in the whole room because of it. Now, on riser height, if you can, I like to go 15 inches per riser. The reason is because we can do a single 7.5 inch step, and that will fall in code. It'll pass code. 7.5 inch steps. You don't have to worry about code. It's also a very comfortable step height. It's also not so tall that home theater seats in front of the riser, you don't want them to hit it as they go back. All right, so where should the door be placed? Well, it kind of depends. If it's a single row, I like it either in front or centered on the rear wall, somewhere where we're not going to have speakers. We're still going to have treatments back there on that rear wall, on the door if it is centered, but also between your surround and your main speaker, having it, you know, to the right or left. Up front is also nice, and that also works really nice with multiple rows, because you don't really want to enter from the back of the room unless you have an entry room where you have a ramp. I've had that before, which was I really love that theater. Had a ramp that ramped up to the riser level, and then you entered between the two seats, but on the riser. That was really cool. So when you walked in, you looked down towards the screen, and just a really cool entrance. The one I have currently is a single row because we didn't really use both rows in the old one. And this is my demo room. Now that one, I did the riser just because it has a cool effect with all the lights around it. So I do step up with a centered entrance, but that is a bass trap wall. I mean, it's got a lot of fancy stuff going on in there. Now, if you Google what size theater should I have, you're gonna find, you know, the golden ratio, you know, stuff like that about how sound resonates in a room and the different dimensions, how they interact with each other, the bolt. I mean, you're going to find all kind of information that's going to confuse you. And I'm going to tell you right now, with room acoustics, that's a room with no acoustic treatments inside it. Now, of course, you're still going to have some issues down low, but if you're doing like a bass trap wall, I mean, for all but the very lowest of frequencies, that wall is not even going to exist, because everything's going to get absorbed when it hits it, because the wall is so deep and it's just so effective at absorbing those low frequencies that you're not going to have to worry about it. So don't stress over that kind of stuff. You're just going to drive yourself nuts. You need to make sure it fits the needs of your room, and then just understand that you're going to be treating this room. And you know, you're not going to overdo it with the treatments, but you're going to have enough to tame the reflections. But a lot of those resonant frequencies are not going to exist. We're not in an open shell of a room that just has bare walls that, you know, would have all of those issues present. So about low ceilings, I'm going to just tell you a little story. Of course, at CEDIA, we won Best Sounding Sound Room, and all the sound rooms pretty much have to deal with the same thing. It's basically, we had a 16 by 24 room. I think it was 8 feet tall. I can look at my computer because I've got the design for it on the computer. But it might have been 9 feet tall. But anyway, it's basically has insulation in the walls, kind of like ductboard or, you know, rigid fiberglass. So it absorbs pretty much most of everything outside. When you shut those doors, it's pretty crazy how much it's really sealed off. You do hear a little bit of bass in the background, but it's probably one of the best head-to-head contests you could have between manufacturers and brands, because everyone's dealing with the same thing. Everyone has a similar size, if not the same size room. So you're all given the same thing. You're dealing with the same, you know, issues where, yes, you can hear a little bit of bass, but it's very minimal. They're pretty darn quiet for what they are. But I actually met up with a client at CEDIA. They have become friends with him, and I designed his room. He had a basement theater or a basement shell. I think we had 7 feet of height. You know, it wasn't a very, very tall ceiling. And he was kind of worried about his ceiling height. I said, no, we're going to use some speakers that we can cross aim. I'm going to tell you where to place them. We're going to do a raise so both rows have pretty accurate placement of Atmos objects, and it's going to be fine. Well, it was so good that, you know, when he went, he's here in all these rooms at CEDIA, and, you know, everyone that puts money into this, you're always worried you're going to be outperformed. And he went there and he was like, man, my room sounds better than a lot of these rooms, and just as good as like some of the best rooms. And, you know, he had a low ceiling that he's dealing with. And he's even had a very well-known room tuner that goes around the country tuning home theaters that, you know, tuned his room and said it was one of the best rooms and most immersive rooms he's ever heard. Not trying to toot my own horn here, well, maybe I am a little bit, but I'm just trying to get the point across that you don't have to have high ceilings to have a great sounding room. We can treat it, we can place everything properly, or we're gonna place everything properly. We're gonna have, you know, room treatments. You're gonna have things in there to manipulate the sound, and you're gonna toe those speakers in. You know, that is one thing with low ceilings. The toe in is extremely important. You really have to cross aim, because you're trying not to have hot spots at the closer seats or the seats right under the speakers, and you're trying to get as even coverage across all the seats as you can with each speaker. So speakers with very limited aiming or no aiming at all, that's not going to cut it. But yeah, in a normal size home, in a normal room, in a normal home, you can have a fantastic small theater.